My name is Rudy Malte, for those of you who don't know me. I am the past president, one of the past presidents of the Association for the Study of Persian Societies, and I'm currently the vice president of the association. And in that capacity, it is my pleasure and distinct honor to open the 8th biannual conference of the association in Tbilisi, the vibrant capital of a beautiful country with a long and venerable history. ASPS is currently in its 22nd year. It was founded in 1996, and in that period has gone through many ups and downs, has faced lots of financial difficulties, which is a recurrent affair because, of course, it's a shoestring operation. We're always in need of money. It's been faced with logistical problems and with organizational issues, having to do with plans to organize our conference in certain places that never materialized. But the association has managed to survive in all these years and even thrive. It has added numerous branches in the last 2 decades, lately one in Japan, and I think there are plans to open one in Ankara as well, if I'm not mistaken. Now, of course, assuming the world won't go to hell in a handbasket in the next couple of years, we may survive a bit longer, and I certainly hope we will. Now, we all know that survival, indeed existence, requires a lot of hard work and effort. And I'd like to acknowledge and thank the people, some of the people who have done some of the hard work to make this organization work and succeed. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. George Sanikidze and his team, his staff, who made this conference possible. If past performance is any guidance, meaning the conference was held here about 10 years ago, and it was a great success, it was very well organized, I think we're in for a repeat, another great conference. The second person I'd like to thank and acknowledge is, of course, our esteemed president, Saeed Arjumand, who's not here yet. He's on his way. He missed his flight from Tehran, and he had to wait for a next one. And he's apparently stuck in traffic from the airport, which is gridlocked. But he's supposed to be here in 10, 15 minutes or so. Now, of course, without Saeed, the organization simply wouldn't exist. He's the founder, past president, and current president, and almost, not quite, but almost president for life. I have had the feeling sometimes of playing the role of Medvedev to Putin, musical chairs, and of course, you know, given the political environment in the world today, he might yet get ideas, but it's pretty clear that this is his last term, and he's done a fantastic job, of course. He has always managed to collect money and bring things around and managed to organize conferences where everyone thought that it would not work. Last minute, it's always worked, so he's done a fantastic job and deserves lots of credit for that. The other person I would like to acknowledge here is Joanne Gross, another pillar, founding member of the organization, really one of the 2 or 3 who go back to the very beginning. Without Joanne, the organization simply also would not exist. You know, she is absolutely amazing in terms of contributing funds and resources and lots of energy and work and so forth. My special thanks I reserve tonight for Ghazal Dabiri, who is simply amazing. She has been a pillar for this particular meeting, and I'm sure we wouldn't be sitting here without her efforts, seen and mostly unseen. I think she deserves a round of applause, actually, and I would ask you to engage in that. So before I give the lectern and the floor to Dr. Sanikidze, I'd like to say a few words in Persian as well. با اجازه شما چند تا کلمه به دوستان ایرانی که اینجا حضور دارند میخوام عرض بکنم. خوش آمدید. ما برگزار کنندگان این همایش، یعنی 8مین همایش انجمن مطالعات جوامع فارسی زبان، ما خیلی خوشحالیم که شما تشریف آوردی و تمام زحمت و خرج به اینجا اومدی و البته امیدواریم که همایش خوبی خواهی داشت و گردش در شهر زیبای تفلیس بکنید، یا قبل از کنفرانس یا بعد از کنفرانس. و البته مهمتر از همه امیدواریم که در سال آینده در شهر شیراز همدیگر رو خواهیم دید، یعنی که شما موفق خواهید بود کنفرانس بعدی را در ایران برگزار کنید. خیلی متشکرم. I would like to give the floor to Dr. Sanekidze. Thank you very much.
Good evening, dear colleagues, dear guests. It's a great honor for me to welcome you in our university and institute for the 8th Biennial Convention of the Association of the Persianate Studies, ASPS. Tbilisi becomes the only city where the convention will be held for the second time. The first convention was organized in 2007, but now the second convention in Tbilisi is much more wide scale, and we have around 175 participants from more than 20 countries. I think that this choice is very important because Georgia and its capital city Tbilisi historically was and today is some kind of bridge between East and West, a meeting point where ideas and goods are exchanged. It must be stressed that Georgia always has extremely close relations with Iran, and Iranian culture has great impact on different aspects of Georgian culture, literature, art, etc. Even today, you can see traces of Iranian influence in the architecture of old part of Tbilisi. Georgian School of Iranian Studies and in general of Oriental Studies has a long tradition and several important achievements. George Tsereteli Institute of Oriental Studies was and is today leading research center of Iranian studies in Georgia. Lots of research works of our Iranologists are published in several countries. Our institute collaborates with different research centers of Iranian studies worldwide. There is a regional office of the ASPS in our institute. It is worth note that some years ago, one of the issues of the Journal of Persianate Studies of ASPS was dedicated to Georgian-Iranian relations. Today, our institute is the research institute of the Ilia State University. Our university is one of the youngest universities in Georgia, but at the same time, the most innovative university in Georgia, I think. It must be stressed that our university is ranked as the best research university in the region of the Caucasus, according to Scopus. I would like to thank our university's administration for supporting us, and my special thanks to the Public Relations Office and IT Office. When around 1 year ago, President of ASPS, Professor Said Amir Arjoman, proposed me to organize the convention in Tbilisi, I did not hesitate and agreed immediately. I repeat, it's really a great honor for us to host the convention for the second time, and I would like to express my gratitude towards Professor Arjoman for his choice and for his support. I would like to thank all members of the Convention Organizing Committee for their contribution. Special thanks to Rudi Meti and Joanne Gross, and my special thanks to the chair of the committee, Hazal Dabir. She is real chair, and it was great pleasure for me to work with Hazal. These last months we communicated not only every day, but I think 3 or 4 times every day. Thank you very much, Hazal. Finally, my special thanks to the Tbilisi committee members and especially my young colleagues and students for their help. Now I wish you interesting presentations, exciting discussions, and dear guests, enjoy your stay in Tbilisi. Thank you very much. And now I would like to give the floor to the rector of our university, Professor Giga Zedania. Please, Giga.
Dear distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to Ilia State University. I know that most of you have traveled from all over the world to this country, and I hope that the travel hasn't been too unpleasant. And I also hope that beside your very intense and interesting academic activity, you will have to find time also to for some sightseeing, because I think it's only logical that the Convention of Association for the Study of Persian Societies takes place in Tbilisi, not only because of the geographical proximity but also because of the intensity of historical linkages and connections. It's also noteworthy that Georgia has been the place where the Center for Persian Studies has been in continual existence for many decades, and Georgi Tsereteli Institute for Oriental Studies is actually this center, and I'm very glad that this center develops further and thrives, and I'm very glad that I see such a distinguished company of colleagues who are here today in this university. I would like to wish you a very successful convention with lots of interesting presentations and debates, and it's my pleasure to give floor to the honorary president of the Georgian Academy of Sciences, academician Thomas Gamprelidze.
I will be very short, ladies and gentlemen. Dear guests and participants of the 8th Biennial Convention of the Association for the Study of Persianate Societies, held in Tbilisi, Georgia, at the George Tsereteli Institute of Oriental Studies, Ilia State University. Academician George Tsereteli himself, a world-famous Arabist and an acknowledged pioneer of the Semitic studies, not only in Georgia, but in the whole of the former Soviet Union, appears in a number of his writings also as an excellent ironist, able to make use of both Iranian and general Indo-European evidence to solve purely Iranian problems, especially problems concerning ancient Iranian cultural influences in the Caucasus. allow me, as the head of the Scientific Council of the George Sorotel Institute of Oriental Studies, to welcome our guests, participants in this very important conference dealing with traditional problems of cultural interchange between East and West, with special emphasis on the Eastern cultures, since light comes from the East. Ex Oriente lux. I wish great success to this conference. Thank you.
A great pleasure to give the floor to the chair of the organizing committee, Azal Davidi. Please.
Thank you. By now you've heard quite a lot from me, but for most part it's been emails about organizing this. So what I'd like to do before I get to the thank yous, and I have a lot of thank yous, is I'd like to say a few words about why I do what I do. And as I would like to start with, I'm a firm believer in the association's mission. I like seeing your shining faces from all different parts of the world talking about all aspects of the Persianate world. The fact that we could be here in Georgia talking about a meeting, before I even get to that, meeting one another is really special. It doesn't happen very often, and it's very important. And so while sometimes the struggle is real, and Rudy mentioned quite a number of the struggles we've faced over the years, anything worthwhile sometimes comes with a little bit of struggle. And so I hope that you will find this a worthwhile endeavor as much as I have, and that you will enjoy each other's papers and the discussions that are generated from these papers. And so this is just a little personal of why I do what I do and why I've been doing what I do for this association. And being chair of the program, a lot of the responsibilities don't just fall on my shoulders. You hear a lot from me, but it would not be possible, as everyone has already mentioned here, without an amazing team of people. And so what I'd really like to do is really take the time and to thank individually everyone who has made this possible. Everyone knows that this is basically occurring after the fallout of the Shiraz conference, and to pull this together so quickly, I really have to thank George Sanikidze, who, without his heroic efforts, every detail that you see here, the beautiful banners, the beautiful program that you see, the cover design, every single detail is all George's at hand, and it's phenomenal, and I thank you wholeheartedly. So I would also like to thank our organizing committee, the ASPS board members, start with those who were unable to be with us, Puriya Ali Moradi, Aida Niku, and Parvana Purshariati, who's the past president. I'd also now like to turn to those who are with us here, of course Rudy, who you've heard from, Joanne Gross, who you'll hear from in a moment, and as well as Daniel Beeben, our treasurer, and I would like to thank him especially for helping just for the moral support and for registration. I know you've heard a lot from him as well. I'd like to thank Mehdi Faraji, who edited the abstracts and put the abstracts together. That's quite an endeavor that he undertook, and I really appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. I also would like to thank Joanne Gross for the very important work that she does with surf. Everyone who is able to attend here from Central Asia is here because of Joanne's efforts with the Surf Fund. And so I really would like to acknowledge that, because it's important for us to hear from our colleagues from all parts of the world. And so thank you for that. And I have already mention George, which again, my wholehearted thanks. And of course to this beautiful city, and to, of course, the Institute and Ilia State University. So my deepest thanks for their generosity and kindness in welcoming us here and offering us their space during the semester. Did you see all the students milling about? So really, thank you for offering us your space during a very busy time in the semester for you. And so, of course, Grigol Beradze and Tamar Lekveshvili, Tamar Mosiashvili, Nicolas Nachtushvili, sorry, Irina, I tried, I practiced, as well. They are George's team, and they have been absolutely phenomenal. So I will take this time now to turn the floor to Joanne, but I've received a round of applause. George has received his round of applause, but everyone who's had a hand in organizing this conference really deserves a round of applause. So thank you.
Joanne, please.
Thank you. Professor George Sanikadze, Professor Giga Zidania, President Dr. Thomas Gamkrilidze, Professor Saeed Arjimand, in absentia, but he's on his way, Professor Rudy Mate, and honored guests and distinguished colleagues. It's really a great pleasure to welcome you all to our 8th biennial convention of the Association of the Study of Persianate Societies. And I have been active in the organization soon after its founding. And much as Ghazal shared to you her personal feelings about the organization, I too really feel very strongly about what we do and why we do it, that we gather people from across the Persianate world and meet in these various places and come together to exchange ideas. And it's just wonderful to see you all here today. Khush Amadid. I would first like to acknowledge, and I know that we've been hearing a lot of gratitude, but I think it should be said more than once or twice or 3 times, again, to acknowledge Professor Sanikadze, Professor Zidania, and President Gamkrilidze for agreeing to host our convention, and of course to the members of the organizing committee who worked so hard before our arrival. And also the students and the faculty who have assisted us. I can't say enough about Dr. Ghazal Dabiri for chairing the organizing committee, and really tireless efforts to make sure the very finest details have been taken care of, along with Professor Sanikadze. She really has been on the U.S. side the heart and the soul, I think, of our organizational efforts. I'm not going to repeat, but just to echo the gratitude that our speakers have already expressed for everyone's help. I'd like to acknowledge Daniel Bebin, Mahdi Faraji, and now I would like to say, as the director of SURF, a few words about SURF stands for Central Eurasia Research Fund, and what we do and what I think we contribute to ASPS and to the community of scholars of Persianate studies. I founded it in 2004. I've been working in Central Asia since 1979, and I was very aware, I have always been aware, of the tremendous scholarship that comes from within Central Asia and the challenges for scholars to actually publish their works, particularly in regions of Tajikistan and other areas as well, Afghanistan, for example. And so I started the organization to fund scholarship toward publications. And it is entirely dependent on donations. We provide grants of up to $1,500 to support the publication costs for a book or a monograph, technical equipment necessary for specific research grants, travel expenses for archival research that will directly result in an original book or manuscript concerning Persian culture by individual scholars from Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Xinjiang. We actually have not yet funded, but they are included in the funding qualifications. Between 2004 and 2018, 35 SURF grants have been awarded, including 3 this past January, to support publications of books on a broad range of topics, including Persian fatwas collections, Persian poetry, the archaeological site of Ustrushana, the history of agriculture in Sogd, the history of 20th century Central Asian migration from Xinjiang to Khorasan, the history of Khojand, and Tajik graphic art and sculpture of the 20th century. Those are only a few of the projects that we've been able to fund. This year's SURF committee consisted of myself, of Daniel Beben, and of Ghazal Dabiri, as if she doesn't do enough. She also was on the committee, and I thank all of you for your contributions. SURF has played an important role in the advancement of scholarship in Central Asia, particularly that of younger scholars who face especially challenging economic issues today. SURF also supports, as Ghazal Dabiri said, the travel expenses of scholars from Central Asia, from Central Eurasia, I should say, to participate in our biennial conventions. And as we this year for Tbilisi, I would like to give a special welcome to those 8 scholars who are with us today. I wish you all a very successful and enjoyable convention, and I really look forward to the next day's presentations, our meetings, our conversations, and our celebrations. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And before arrival of Saida Jumband, we'll have small concert of our Iranian guests. Please.
شدگان خسرو شیرین پناهی ما کشته آن مهر و خواهیم ما از دو جان غیر تو ای عشق نخواهیم ما از دو جان غیر تو ای عشق نخواهیم صد شور نهان با ما تاب و تب جان با ما در این سر بی سامان غمهای جهان با ما با سازن ای با جام می با یار می شورید گر اندازیم در میکده جان شورید گر اندازیم در میکده جان جام مستان غزل خالی همه مستان سراندازی هنر ندانیم که هرچه میتوانیم جز این هنر ندانیم که هرچه میتوانیم غم از دلها براندازیم ما دل شدگان خسرو شیرین پناهیم لب بر لب کوزه بردم از غایت آز حوضو طلبم واسطه عمر دراز لب بر لب من نهاد و میگفت براز میخور که بدین جان نمی آیی باز ابر آمد و زار بر سر سبزه گریست بی باده گل رنگ نمی شاید زیست این سبزه که امروز تماشاگر ماست تا سبزه خاک ما تماشای کیست دست رسید اگرچه دلها پرخون است شکوه شادی افسون است سپیده ما گلگون است آی گلگون است که دست دشمن در خون است ای ایران غمت مرساد جاویدان شکوه تو باد راه ما راه بهروزی است اتحاد رمز پیروزی است صلح آزادی جاودان بر همه جهان خوش باش یادگار خون عاشقان ای بهار ای بهار تازه جاودان در این چمن شکفته باش نوبهار است در آن کوش که خوشدل باشی نوبهار است در آن کوش که خوشدل باشی که بسی گل بدمد باز تو در گل باشی که بسی گل بدمد باز تو در گل باشی من نگویم که کنون با کنشینم من نگویم که کنون با که نشینم چه بنوش که تو خود دانی اگر زیرک آمد باشی من نگویم که کنون بام که نشینا چه بنوش که تو خود دانی اگر زیرک و عاقل باشی مرا عاشق چنان باید مرا عاشق چنان باید که هر باری که برخیزد که هر باری که برخیزد قیامت های پرآتش قیامت های پر آتش زر سوی برانگیزد زر سوی برانگیزد دلی خواهیم چون دوزخ چه دوزخ را فرو سوزد دلی خواهیم چون دوزخ که دوزخ را فرو سوزد 200 دریا بشوراند ز موج نپریزد ز موج نپریزد چو شیری سوی جنگ آید دل او چون ننگ آید به جز خود هیچ چو نگذارد و با خود نیز بستیزد مرا عاشق چنان باید مرا عاشق چنان باید که هر باری که برخیزد هر باری که برخیزد
Thank you very much for our Iranian guests, our Iranian colleagues and friends. And now the young Georgian artist song is very traditional and international and very academic. Thank you. Please. Thank you very much, and it's my great pleasure to give the floor to Professor Germant, the President of the ASPS, please, for the presentation.
Thank you very much. My profound apologies for missing the flight. I thought I had it there, good. And it's certainly a hard act to follow the music, and after that you have to listen to this dry academic talk, which is the custom of the presidential addresses. I'll try to be brief, but God help me. The last address, some of you may remember from Istanbul, was about, in fact, Sufism in the 14th to 16th centuries and how it had a paradoxical consequence of creating what one of our colleagues called millennial sovereignty, or I called it autocracy in that talk. Today I'm going back with my studies of Sufism to the earlier period. It's kind of moving backwards, and I'll look at the period of the formative period of Persianate Sufism, that is from the 9th to the 12th centuries, 3rd to the 6th of Hijri. Now, although of course prototypes of Sufis are predictably seen among the disciples of the Prophet, but in fact, historically speaking, Sufism begins as a movement in the 9th century. It begins in two centers, in Khorasan primarily, also in Iraq, around Baghdad and so forth, with an epicenter in Egypt. Now, Iraq was very much an intellectual center. Is it good, or is there some... the microphone, is it? Maybe it should go further back. Yeah, okay, thanks. But in fact, even if you look at the Iraqi people like Junaid, Nouri, Hallaj, and so forth, were mostly from Khorasani or at least Iranian origins. But of course, in those days, in Baghdad was full of them, and Basra, but it's in Khorasan that it starts really as an important urban movement in the 9th century. And that's where I'm going to begin. Now, at the beginning, it was, as any movement, barely distinct from other trends in
in Khorasan, and especially the two trends that I'll focus on. It's really one trend, sometimes called Fotovat, sometimes called Ayyari. It's probably the same. It's the movement of these urban associations, guilds, etc., with the rituals, and they're called Javan Mard. Javan Mard of Fetyan is the Arabic, Javan Mard is the Persian, for members of those groups. Now, if you look at the forerunners already in the 8th century, real early, like Ibrahim Adham. By the way, the A in Persian is instead of Ibna, is Ibrahim, son of Adham. Usually you owned by your father, so that's how you say Ibrahim Adham. And because I'll have a lot of them, instead of calling them Ibn, I will do the Persian way. Now, if you go back to that generation, already in the 8th century, there are 4 important figures mentioned. 2 of those are, in fact, 3 of them are from Khorasan, 2 of them have associated with Fotobat. And out of those latter group, in fact, one, Fuzail ibn Iyaz, it was a highway robber, Sa'luk, also Ayyar. And then he repented and he became a Sufi full-time. But let's see what Ayyar meant in that period, in the 9th century, 8th, 9th century. I think to do that, I want to look a little bit further east to the Uyghur Empire, which is the only one and only Manichaean empire that lasted from 760 to 840. Why do I want to do that? Because the Buddhist Sogdian texts that we have and the Manichaeans that were discovered 100 years ago show very clearly that those two, Manichaeism and Buddhism, are very, very tightly connected. There was a recent discovery, I believe in 2010, of a mandala in Japan by the Manichaean one. You can see how the two are completely interwoven together in these magnificent paintings, iconography of the Manichaeans. That lasted in the 8th century, as I said. There was this kingdom. Now, the reason why that's important is that both of them, of course, Manichaeans, and people don't talk about it, but it was tremendously important at the time, the source of world renunciation is from Buddhism and Manichaeism mixed together. All the Buddhist texts that we have are either Sogdian or Manichaean ones, and indeed the life of the Buddha was first translated first into Parthian, then into Persian, and finally into Arabic by them. So my hunch is that that's the source of world renunciation, or tark dunya, that is very pronounced and important at the very beginning of Sufism. Why do I think so? And what's that got to do with Ayyars that I mentioned? Well, Mani was, from the beginning of the 3rd century, he went to India, of course, and then he went to the Kushan, and he studied Buddhism, and he puts Buddha as one of the Ferishtak's messengers of God before him. In fact, the first convert was a Piruz Shah, who was the Shah of Kushan, brother of Shapur. And he converted him, and then he introduced him to Shapur. And Mani wrote a book called Shapur Gan in Persian, the only one, for Shapur, 242 of the Common Era. I want to read one sentence from it. Luckily, we have fragments recovered. He says that then God Kharat Shah, that is his the wisdom's empire of wisdom he wants to create, will send messengers, Ferishtak, to the east and west. and they will go and bring the pious, dinvaran, with their helpers, heyaran. And now I think heyaran is, of course, yaran. If you look at the texts, I think ayyaran, or I think yaran, dustan, etc., they're mentioned together. So my hunch, I'd like to Professor Asatrian's there. I want to check my etymology with him, see if my guess is right. In fact, this is exactly when the Manichaean kingdom falls. That's just when they begin to write Persian in the Arabic alphabet. And my guess is that they wrote Hayaran as Ayyaran with an Ain in there. So, but whether or not that is correct, I have no idea. The connection certainly is important. And I think that was really that's the source of old culture that these Fotovat and Javan Mardan leagues, in fact, did draw on. And as I said, all the early Sufis very much are from there, from that league. But of course, Sufism begins to distinguish itself pretty quickly with its own designation. That's the first thing. They call themselves Darwish or Faqir, and Darwish, of course, is the translation is the Pahlavi term for poor. So it's exactly the same word, and Faqr is certainly poverty, a great, very important topic in Sufism. So they call themselves Darwish and Fuqara. That would be as distinct from Fatah, Fetyan, and Javan Mardan. But nevertheless, there continues to be a lot of overlap. The earliest texts of the Sufis that we have in Persian begin, the vocative is always Ey Darwish, Ey Javan Mard, or else if they're members of association, Ey Baradar Ya Akhi. I think the two things are interchangeable, and that's really a part of that culture. Now, in the 9th century, for instance, this Ahmad ibn Khazruyev was a commander, Sarhang Javan Mardan. He was the commander of the Javan Mardan, and he also he entertained the head of the Ayyaran Balkh ro, da'watش میکرد خونش very often. And so you see this connection very clearly. I can go on, of course. I'm late. I don't want to keep you here for the rest of the evening. I'll go very quickly. But one example should suffice. Now, so designation is really one aspect of social differentiation and historical identity formation. Clothing, as we'll see tomorrow with the presidential session, is another way of identifying yourself and so forth. Now, the adoption of the kherqeh by the woolen cloak as a distinctive attire for the dervishes, in fact, took place in contradistinction to the secular vest or qaba. Now, and that took some time. There was a kind of an important, this marks an important stage of differentiation of the Sufis as spiritual leaders from the Fetyan, from the Javan Mards and so forth. And an important stage in the identity formation. In the mid-9th century, we have this Ahmad Khazruye and a certain Shah Shuja, that is Shah ibn Shuja Kermani, another Javan Mard and another Sufi. They both go to see their respective sheikhs, and they go in qaba, presumably very ornate ones, these two coming from their gatherings, and the sheikhs don't like it. They say, really, you should not wear the qaba, you should wear the kherqeh. We don't want the things that we like. Now, but by the time you get to the 11th century, then, Hojviri writes, no, qaba is the only proper attire for the Darwishan. In fact, it is poverty,
and Sufism tout court, to quote him. So by that time, this becomes important. But of course, even more important than your attire for your identity, especially identity of a social, of a religious group, is their doctrine, the distinct doctrine that they can develop. The early Sufism, the earliest Sufis, we have lots of aphorism recorded from them. They say this, they say that, they say, on different topics. The first person who really puts these together into a systematic treatise, divides them into 75 chapters and topics beginning from repentance, abstinence, then the important topics, annihilation of the ego, fana, nafs, and baqa fillah, persistence in God, and finally tawheed, unification, and mystical union with God as the final stage. Now, until he did that, he died in 995 in Bukhara, and he wrote in Arabic. Until he did that, that really wasn't done. Everyone, sometimes you say, oh, Junaid was the first one who talked about baqa fillah, and somebody else was the first one who talked about faqr. But there is no system until he writes them into these chapters. He wrote, of course, in Arabic, because the first 100 years, although Persian was available, all the Sufis wrote in Arabic because they had to defend themselves. It's really quite apologetic. The first half is that the Sufis are good Muslims, they believe all the doctrines of Islam, and they're better interpreters of it, and then they go to their distinct theory. Now, until the distinct theory was formed, I think just calling themselves faqir or having the qaba, khirqa, and so forth, won't do it. And this is when it happens, 995, end of the 9th century, in Arabic. He was very influential. In the following century, they all wrote, they copied him, basically. And the most important figure there is Khaja Abdullah Ansari. Khaja Abdullah Ansari takes this systematized chapter, totally arranged chapters, and in two different words. The most famous one is his Sad Maidan. He classifies them into 100 stages of sulukam, perfection. The last one, you become one of the friends of God, awliya Allah. And then you unify with him and you know him, but you have to go 100 steps. Now, this wasn't done before. And of course, once this is done, the Sufis have a doctrine that really reinforces their identity, sociologically. Now, and this indeed happens just as the first defensive wave goes, and they start writing in Persian. Now, the oldest book is in the middle of the 11th century by another Bukhari. They're all up there, by the way. We think that the things happening in Isfahan or Kashan, with due respect, that comes much later. Everything starts in Khorasan, that some of us are from or affiliated with. But anyway, he writes, the second Bukhari, writes a huge thing. It's about 3,000, 4,000 words, whereas the Arabic treaty of Karabazi was quite small. This guy, this Mustamli Bukhari, writes a huge thing. That's the biggest thing. And then there's Kashf al-Mahjub of Hujviri, I think, Data Ganj, who's buried in Lahore, who's very early, 11th century, and Khaja Abdullah Ansari. Now, in all these things, then, you have this, as Persian develops into the second lingua franca of the Muslim world, these things are written in Persian, and they're really no longer defensive. A lot of this is brought into it. And the interesting thing is that, of course, the Islam that travels further east and south to India and so forth, is the Sufi Persianate Islam, and not really, they don't study fiqh. There's no evidence for a long, long time. But what they do read is precisely these spiritual commentaries, stages, and so forth. So, now then the Persianate reconstruction and transformation of Sufism then involved a marked shift. Now here, I said you have to have a doctrine, but the doctrine doesn't remain fixed. First, I suggested world renunciation is the most important thing. Terk dunya, you do that, annihilations, poverty is important only as a step to annihilate yourself and your nafs, and then you can progress. In this, I think, with the Persian phase, I think the first thing that happens is that the love of God takes the place of, replaces it as the first. Of course, Terk dunya never disappears. It's always there to the end. But the configuration changes. And love of God becomes primary, what I call love mysticism with these Persian writings. It begins, again, with the Arabic word. They use muhabbat. It's a famous Quran 554, I believe. How does it go? That is, God loves them and they love God. And this was a favorite, of course. They said, well, God loves everyone, and everyone has to, he creates the world to love them, and then they reciprocate. So the love is, God's the initiator of love, and then they follow up. Now, of course, as soon as they start writing in Persian, of course, at first they do write about muhabbat, and that becomes a technical topic. But guess what they talk about? They talk about ishq. And ishq is really erotic ishq. It is a part of a means, not the only means or the most important, but certainly means of mystical union, etc. So the poetry, love mysticism, really flourishes enormously in this period. And it culminates, of course, in Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi in the 13th century. In Bukhara, of course, his father came from Balkh, but and he was influenced by him. But Divan Shams, of course, is really ecstatic, development of ecstatic love mysticism. I'll get to that in a minute. But even before that, real early, when some of these Iranians in Baghdad are writing, there's one famous one called Hossein Nouri. I think he's really the first initiator, founder of love mysticism. He starts using ishq in Arabic too. And of course, Hallaj uses it profusely. And guess who? Avicenna, Ibn Sina, picks it up. He wrote a Risala fil Ishq. He didn't, of course, he wrote it in Arabic, but it's not fil Muhabba or anything like that. And this kind of love mysticism, I think, stays on. The key work is Savaneh by Ahmad Ghazali. He died 526. He was the younger brother of the other Hujjat al-Islam, the more famous Ghazali. Ahmad Ghazali Savaneh is very difficult work. I think he was influenced by Ibn Sina and the philosophical thing, and that's, I think is Dr. Zakipur here. He should tell me the Savaneh has accidents, incidents, would be really Abyssinian philosophy, I think, as opposed to essence and various kind of accidental beings. But let me just read one couple of things from him. عشق از عدم از بحر من آمد به وجود من بودم عشق را از عالم مقصود. In other words, God really has created, and Ishq is this cosmic force, and we simply, it's vouchsafed by God, we simply become one with him through this God. He loves them and they love him back. I think the Ain al-Ghazat, I think, follows that very thoroughly. One other quotation from Ghazali, he says, "O Javan Mard, pre-eternity has reached here, but eternity cannot reach an end. This hospitality of God extends forever, and the pre-eternity and eternity of your heart and your time." Now, I don't have time to go into it either now, but it's I think, again, the Manichaean, Zorvanian notion of time, eternity, pre-eternity, azal wa abad. This comes up a lot. They're the same thing. There's this space continuum and time, but that's a very complicated thing to go into. But let me stick to my main point. This Fotowa, I didn't raise it to drop it. The Fotovat culture, even though the Sufis become distinct, and of course, already in the 9th century, the idea of being friends of God, awliya Allah, that gives them a completely religious identity that the Ayyaran really didn't have and don't have it. But the popular culture doesn't disappear. Now we have a few things are being published, but the greatest work is that huge voluminous Samak Ayyar that was published by Khan Lari 30, 40 years ago and so forth. That's a fantastic book, of course. You see these ceremonies of these Ayyaran, they get together, they have Ahd Javan Mardi, they have the Sogand, they drink together, something unpleasant that, again, all these are very ancient terms. The term for Khoda, God, is Dadar Kirdegar, and so forth. Yazdan Dadar Kirdegar. Things that are really ancient sets of ideas are there. So my predecessor, Parvaneh Purshariati, in her Bosnia address, in fact, called Samak Ayyar a Parthian novel. I agree. And then here I want to add that, of course, Mani was also Parthian, and sometimes Manichaeism is described as a Parthian religion. It's really basically the same culture that comes up with these Fotovad, Javan Mardan, Ayyaran, even today with our Lutis and Lat Lutia. They're the same basically, same culture that gets transmitted. Now, it gets pushed out with the development of a very distinct Sufi identity in the 12th and 13th century. But then it creeps back, it comes back. Why does it come back? My guess is that it comes back because in the Turco-Mongolian period of domination, the Seljuks were Turks, the Ilkhanis, Mongols, they're Turks. They're Turanians, let's say, if you take the Ferdowsi's Shahnameh thing, they're the arch enemies. So what happens to the idea of kingship? Why does this guy called Shah Shuja Kermani, why they regularly call themselves Shah, etc.? And the reason is, I think that's a kind of a carnivalesque travesty of the idea of kingship. The idea of kingship, of course, Shahanshah was very useful for the ruling class elite, all the Seljuks, everyone. The Ilkhanis claimed to be Shahanshah, they used the title and Sultan. But there was this underground. So this Shah Shuja had sort of an underground kingdom, if you like. The symbols of Shahanshahi are used very frequently. The terms are used in Samak Ayyar. Of course, it's the Khurshid Shah marrying the Mahpari, the sun god, and the moon, fairy moon, but the queen god, etc. Their marriage is a big cosmic celebration. Things of that sort do come up, of course. That requires a completely separate work, but it is interesting. I want to look at it as a sort of a carnivalesque protest, that indeed this old culture of kingship, because in the pages of the Journal of Persian Studies, we identified two basic components of distinctive ideas of Persianate Islam, and one was Sufism, of course, Persian Sufism. The other one was kingship and the revival of the ancient idea of kingship that I've written a lot about, but not from this point of view, because that also provides an idiom of protest. It's the carnivalesque, I use it in Bakhtin's term, indeed, the way that you do use a travesty of the same symbols to kind of, to fire a protest movement. Now, I have foolishly put 13th and 14th century in my title, so I have to, and it would be something remiss if I didn't mention Maulana, who I've mentioned already, but also Iraqi and Hafiz, because they are, I think you get the resurfacing of this Ayyari culture in the last two. Maulana is important. It's a culmination of the love mysticism. At the same time that, and I think he's definitely, there's no doubt that erotic, ecstatic love is part of the same process. Let me read a few lines of a very important ghazal. You only know the first line, most of you probably. Man mastu to divane mara ke barat khane. But that's not the end of it, actually. This is just the beginning. I drunk and you mad, who will take us home then? Now, I told you 100 times, Maulana says, drink a few cups, glasses less. As I left the house, a drunken man came to me. Implicit in his glance were the rose garden and the lover's den, Kashane. I asked him, where are you from? He grinned and said, a half of me from Turkestan, the other half of me from Farghane. Half of me this and half of me this. Then I told him, befriend me as I am your kinsman. He said, I know not the self from the stranger. گفتم که رفیقی کن با من که منت خویشم. گفتا که به نشناسم من خود ز بیگانه. In love there is really, in دویت از بین میره, there's no otherness. And this to me is a very important element of pantheistic love. And indeed, that's love poetry very quickly goes hand in hand with pantheism. Now, pantheism is another interesting thing. Not everything is Persianate, of course. Pantheism begins with Ibn Arabi. And he died 40 years before Maulana. His idea of, he puts knowledge, saving knowledge, in place to some extent of love, not entirely. He sees the two things connected, but basically the kind of gnosis or marifat or saving knowledge becomes central for him. And Maulana was too involved with Shams Tabrizi to notice Ibn Arabi, who died in Damascus. But another person who's in Konya for a little while, Iraqi, in fact, did travel to Damascus to die where Ibn Arabi was, and he studied Ibn Arabi, wrote 2 treatises about him. And to me, Iraqi is important for reconciling the two. He doesn't want to give up the centrality of love because of this new trend, the Gnostic trend. And he, of course, accepts the pantheism and kind of inflects love and pantheism to go together. Of course, others were greatly influenced by Ibn Arabi too, and the saying in Persian that is so-called unity of existence, wahdat wujud, the Persian phrase for it, hame oust, all is he God. Now, I would I have an ecstatic thing, but I'll read that quietly. I think it's a little too. But one Iraqi, for instance, one of his tarjiband has this leitmotif that is very pantheistic. Hame oust, harche hast, yaqin, janu, jananu, dilu, dilbar o dil. Everything is all the same and part of pantheism. Now, so Iraqi, what else did he like? Of course, he liked the qalandars. Now, this is a new manifestation of the old Irfan, Javan Mad, etc. The story is, of course, that in fact he went all over the place with the qalandars and he fell in love with a young, good-looking qalandar. Whether or not that's true, he certainly wrote about qalandaran being very important. And this is beginning of this, what I call antinomianism. It's beginning of political protest, social deviance, everything put together. The antinomianism of the qalandar Sufis that I think it becomes the hallmark of the next century, 14th century, and Hafiz as well. This is what Iraqi says, for instance, about the Qalandaran. He says, "O libertine of the Qalandar creed, ey rend Qalandar kish, drink wine and fear no one. In the tavern, like the riffraff, like Obash, become a drinker and a rogue." Now, the antinomian tendency of Persianate pantheistic love mysticism finds consummate expression, of course, in the poetry of Hafiz, where the libertine or rend is a ubiquitous protagonist, and the tavern or the house of joy, kharabat, are the setting for the poet's extolling of the virtues of poverty, very faqr, darvishi, mendicancy, gedai, and love together. These come in close association with each other. He does actually downplay the role of reason, saving knowledge, for, I would say, beauty of God, Jamal, and in fact, its various manifestations. So in a famous ghazal, which is about nazarbazi, which is admiring the manifestation of God's beauty in human faces, young men's, he says this. He says, "Aqlan nuqte pargar wujudand, vali ishq danad ke dar in daire sargardanand." Men of reason are the point of the compass of existence, but love knows that they are perplexed in the circle. I can go on, but the most important thing from our point of view, significant shift, is in fact the carnivalesque transposition of royal symbolism. Instead of any underground court of the king or a prince of the Fotova like Shah Shuja, Hafiz speaks of Dawlat Pir Moha. That is the turn in power or the state of the elder of the Magi. And in one place, in fact, he himself says, he prays, Agarat faqr bebakhshande, Agarat saltanat faqr bebakhshande dil. Saltanat faqr comes up several times. The sovereignty of poverty. This is kind of contradictory things that come together. The best thing I can do is, in fact, quote another verse from the same ghazal, which also has بسی پادشاهی کنم در گدایی. Again, پادشاهی و گدایی, فقر و سلطنت, he puts them together. But the one that I want, my favorite is بر در میکده رندان قلندر باشند که ستانند و دهند افسر شاهنشاهی. At the door of the tavern are found the Qalandar libertines who take and give the crown of imperial kingship. Now, I take this to be the sprouting of Ayyaran's underground symbolism and idiom of protest within the Persian Sufism that is very significant in this period, and it resulted in the promotion of social deviance, political protest, and the justification of poverty in this world, and thus amounted to significant cultural democratization of Sufism. Well, my friends, you and I have no possibility of becoming friends of God, awliya, nor millennial sovereigns. So let me propose that we adjourn now, with your permission, to just like the Rendan Qalandar Hafiz, adjourn, if not to the Kharabat, at least to a makeshift reception that we have over there, and there engage in the taking and giving of the crown of imperial kingship. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much. And at the end, again, young Georgian artists with Georgian songs. Please.
Is there Voy, Maila Mazi Welcome song.